Let's be honest, CRMs are not sexy, but they are an essential part of any business that takes themselves seriously. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to build your very own CRM that's tailor-made to the way that your business operates. And we're going to use Claude Code to build this. It's an AI tool. We don't need to write any code. We're going to have Claude Code plan, design, and build out the CRM for us. You don't need any prior experience to follow along. You just need to be willing to commit to building along with me here. Okay, this is not a video that you just sit back and watch. This is a video where you do. You're going to follow me as I build a hypothetical CRM for a hypothetical business, and you're going to build your CRM for your business alongside me. Before we start, why should you want to do this in the first place? There are obviously a host of off-the-shelf CRM tools that you can subscribe to. And I'm going to assume that you're not using spreadsheets, or if you are, you're outgrowing them, right? That's why you want to build a custom piece of software. So the off-the-shelf tools, the problem with those is that they are designed for many, many customers, many types of businesses all at once. So they're trying to cater to this sort of diversity of needs, but not your specific business needs. So there's this kind of averaging effect that goes on where it might have some of the features that you need, like the basic ones, but the ones that make your business unique, it's not catering to that, right? So you're finding workarounds, you're using other tools and stitching them together, or you're copy pasting stuff between different tools. And that's obviously costing your team a lot of time and your business a lot of money every week. And not only that, it's an actual hindrance on the business growth. Now, if you have a custom piece of software, what that tends to do then is the software just gets out of the way, right? It's not this tool that you have to work around, right? It's something that is just molded perfectly to the actual sort of operational uniqueness of your business. And as your business changes, right, as the requirements or your processes need to adapt to the market, right, so can the software. So it's this kind of organic tool that grows with you. Now, one quick disclaimer. The purpose of this video is to show you how to build that first version of your custom CRM rather than subscribing to one of those big expensive ones. But what we don't want to be doing here is vibe coding some big kind of enterprise level CRM that you can migrate your thousands of customers over from, your Salesforce or whatever you might be using right now. If you're technical, right, this video will give you that first step that maybe you can take in that direction, but that is kind of a different beast of a project. You probably need some outside expertise. Now, with all that said, let's jump into the building. Okay, so the only things you need to get started here is to have a Claude subscription and to have the Claude app downloaded. Now, quick note on pricing. You might be able to get by it with just the Pro plan here. The way that Claude pricing works is that you have a certain amount of usage of their AI models within a certain window, a 4-hour window to be precise. And if you exceed your allowance within that window, then your usage is just going to be blocked until the end of that 4-hour window. So you could make this work and perhaps spread the work over maybe 2 or 3 windows. Or you could just go straight to the lowest max plan, which should be plenty for what we're going to be doing here. So with the Claude app open, we're going to jump over to the Code tab. So this is Claude Code. And if you haven't used Claude Code before, you should just think about this as an AI bot that can do everything that you can do on your computer. So it can create, edit files, it can browse the web, and we are just going to control it in natural language, of course. Now, the first thing that we want to do in building any piece of software is to plan out ahead of time what we're going to build, right? Before you build a skyscraper, you should have a blueprint. If you just jump in this box and just say, hey, build me an app that does X, Y, and Z, there's a lot of assumptions that Claude is going to have to make, a lot of gaps that it has to fill, and it's going to go out and it's going to build with those assumptions, and it's going to show you what it's made, and you're going to look at it and you're going to go, oh, that's not quite what I had in mind, because it just had to make too many assumptions. So we want to get as specific as possible, as early as possible, but we can use Claude in the planning process. And the most effective way that I've found for doing that is to actually have the AI interview me about what functionality that I want in my app. Now, In the description for this video, you'll find what we call a skill file. So a skill file is just a way to quickly teach Claude how to behave in a certain way. And one of these skills is for planning. And so basically it's just a set of instructions that we're going to give to the AI that's going to basically tell it how to behave relative to us. So this skill file is specifically basically instructing us to interview us about our app with the purposes of, at the end of the interview process, creating a specifications doc, basically a set of written requirements about how our app should behave. So if you follow the link in the description, you'll be able to download this plan skill, as well as a couple of other skills that we're going to use in other parts of this video. And all I want you to do is, with Claude Code open, is I want you to drag that folder down into the chat here, and I just want you to ask Claude to add this skill file to my personal skills. And all Claude is going to do there is it's going to put that file in a specific place on your computer that's going to allow Claude to basically ingest it. It's going to allow us to use that skill in the next step. And you'll notice here, when you create a new session with Claude Code, you're going to give it a folder that you want to work in. For this step, it doesn't matter what folder that we're working in. We just want to make sure that we're also operating locally. And so it'll tell us here that it installed that skill, right? And we can also do the same thing. In fact, we could do all three at the same time. We could say, do the same for these skills, because these are the ones that we're going to use in the next steps of the video. Now, with the new session opened, we're going to start to plan this app. Now, all of the files and all of the code related to your CRM needs to live in a specific place on your computer. So you need to choose here kind of the parent folder where we're going to add what will end up being a new project folder for this app. So this might be like a projects folder or your documents folder. For me, I've got a specific projects folder here on my computer. And literally all we're going to do here is we're going to go /plan. This is how we're going to invoke or tell Claude to behave according to that planning skill file that we just installed. In other words, tell it to interview us. And then literally here, you can just record yourself. That's the easiest way. It's just record yourself in a rambling way. It doesn't matter. Just describe everything that you think that this version of the app needs to do. It can be rough. It doesn't matter. So I've got here a voice transcript that I've already prepared that I am going to put through to Claude. And the other thing that we want to do here is we want to make sure that we are using the Opus 5 model. This is sort of the sweet spot model for this kind of planning work. Sonnet is just a little bit too simplistic. It's better for executing from a well thought out plan. And Fable is just very expensive. It's going to burn through your usage very quickly. Opus is still very, very good. So more than competent for this kind of task. And you're just going to hit go, and Claude is going to start thinking, and it's going to start preparing some questions for you. And what the skill file is designed to do is going to ask you questions one by one, because your answers to a preceding question might influence the way that it asks subsequent questions. Okay, so here's an example. It's thought for a little bit, and then it's ask me my first question here, right? So this particular one is within my CRM. So it's recommending that we add an explicit decline action. It'll usually do this. It'll provide one option which is recommended. That doesn't mean it's the best option. It doesn't have all the context about your business. And you also, if none of these options match exactly what you had in mind, you can always just come into here and just type a different answer. So in my case, I'm going to say, actually, this first option is just fine. It's got some additional questions here it wants to ask me at the same time. And, in the process of thinking about the answer to this one, I've realized, actually, no, we need another status here for our project. So we actually need pending, and we need planning, and then we need in progress. So it's those sorts of things that you will answer in this step. Now, you might find going through this process that it starts at some point to ask you just silly or obvious questions. At that point, you can just say, okay, stop asking me questions. Let's just make the plan, make the spec requirements doc. Otherwise, it will at some point sort of exhaust all the questions that it wants to ask, and then it will write this spec document for you on its own. And so you can see here, I'm being very patient. It is now writing the spec file. and it's now told me where that lives. So that spec document is something that you can then click into and open now and review. You can also edit it if you want. You just have to click on this little guy over here, and that'll switch it basically into edit mode. You'll notice this formatting here. This is something called markdown formatting. It's a particular way to format a document. You use these asterisks for bold text. You use these hashtags for headers, etc. It's fairly simple. So you might want to manually refine some of this, but you can also just ask Claude to make changes here. So, you can say, oh no, I want, my open tasks to live somewhere else, for example. I probably wouldn't overthink the design element of this yet, because we're going to go in the next step into actually prototyping how the interface, how the design of this app will look. And it's much easier to make changes there. But this is more just about capturing the business logic. Like, what is overall the different things that we need to have in this application? And so this looks fine. Now, the next step is actually to prototype the design of our app. So we can kind of click through the different screens, make sure that it behaves as we're expecting it to. Because a spec document like this is not so much for us, actually. This is more as an input to the AI to create that initial prototype. Because this is kind of hard to read as a human, right? We want to be thinking about here showing, not telling. We're really going to understand it once we can actually just click through the different screens. That's where we can then make further modifications. Now, to start the prototyping, right, you'll be able to go / here and select that prototype skill, but we don't want to do it here within this same chat thread that we've been doing the planning. Because one of the most important things when working with these AI models, these large language models, LLMs, is to manage our context. We don't want to have a lot of previous conversation thread, because that's all noise for the LLM to have to pass and think through when it does more work, right? It's like having a very long conversation with somebody and saying, hey, what was that thing you said 5 minutes ago? So instead, we want to create a new session here. And what this previous planning step has done is actually created a folder for us for this project inside of that parent directory that we selected before. So for me, that's this Meridian CRM folder that I'm going to open. And now from here, this is where I'm going to invoke that prototype skill. And since there's only one file, that spec document that we created, this prototype skill should work on its own, but we can always just be explicit and say, prototype from, and then we can use the @ symbol to select that spec document specifically. And this is also the point where if we have any specific design guidance, like a particular look or aesthetic that we like, we can define that here. We can either define it in text, or much easier is just to paste an image. So if there's an app that you like, screenshot it, paste that screenshot in here. You can also grab a pretty cheap subscription to Mobbin just for this project if you need to, which is a repository of lots of different apps. And so on Mobbin, you can do something, like search for dashboard specifically, and I might decide, actually, this design from Perplexity looks really cool. So I'm going to copy that as a PNG. Now, of course, you don't need to use Mobbin. You can just, as I said, screenshot an app that you like the look of. So I'm just going to paste that in here, and I'm going to say, make the aesthetic like the attached image from Perplexity. And then I'm going to hit run. Now, while this is running, I want to talk about this prototype skill just for a second. So this is doing a few things under the hood that I didn't want to overwhelm you with, but it's helpful to know. So right now we're building just the design of our app, right? It's not going to have any logic with it. It's not going to have a database in it. We're not actually going to be able to use it to store any customers at this step. That's going to come later. So this is kind of like a lightweight version of our app. And we call this in the industry the front end. And why we call it the front end will become apparent in a little bit. And at the end of the day, right, all this front end is a bunch of files on our computer with code in them, right? Computer code. This isn't quite accurate. This is binary code, ones and zeros. The code that our prototype skill is writing isn't like this, but it is simply text stored in files on your computer that your computer knows to interpret as kind of a working app that we can play with, right? And so specifically what we're using there are two technologies. One is called React, right? This is a framework and a language for building front ends, for building interfaces and app. It is the most well-established, popular framework in the world. And so we're very safe by using something like React. And the other thing that we're using is something called ShadCN. So if you do some more of this AI development, you may come across this ShadCN. This is basically like a pre-built library of design assets. So our agent doesn't have to go and design from scratch what does a button look like or what does a form look like. It can use these pre-built ShadCN components. So that's going to give our design a degree of consistency just right out of the gate. And it also adheres to just a general principle when working with these AI models, which is to try to give it as many constraints as we can. So it doesn't have to guess and make weird decisions, right? We kind of make the decisions, the high-level decisions about, for example, what technologies to use for it, and then it implements those. Now, obviously, I want this to be beginner friendly, so I've made those decisions for you in this prototype skill, but you can always chat back and forth with the AI to try to understand a little bit more about maybe why we're using these technologies or what other technologies might be a better fit for, X, Y, or Z feature that you end up building. Now, this prototyping process can take some time. My agent here, my AI, has been working for almost 25 minutes. It's currently testing out the app itself. It's opened up its own browser and it's clicking around to try to see what is broken. So that obviously takes some time. It'll go faster if you use the Sonnet 5 model, and that may be sufficient, but if your plan allows it, I would suggest using the Opus 5 model, which is just more likely to get some of those smaller details right. But obviously, while this is working, go and grab a coffee, go and get some fresh air, and you can come back when it has finished. Okay, so the prototype is built. This took about 45 minutes, and a lot of that time was actually testing the AI, clicking around the screen just to see that everything worked okay. So hopefully it picked up any issues. Now, it's got the app running here on a URL that we can open in a web browser. So if you just click on this, you can actually open the prototype in a web browser. So here are all the different screens. This is like a table of contents of all of the prototype screens that we can view. And if we just click into this first one, I think we'll see kind of the overall dashboard that's built. Okay, so it's super clean design. You can see that it matched that Perplexity aesthetic very, very nicely. And it has sort of a customers tab here. I've got a projects tab. I've got some tasks. Okay, as an admin, great. I've got different sort of pricing catalog things. I can add a new one. So this is matching my spec really, really nicely. And this is all, of course, just mock data, just made up data. When we build the actual version of our app, this will all be gone, and we will, of course, build new customers and everything from scratch. It even has, you can see here, it's even built in a little user switcher here. So I can actually see how the app looks from the point of view of different users, because not everybody has access to the same thing. So my sales and ops users, they don't have all that admin functionality that my super admin does, right? Super admin can invite team members, etc. So the whole point of this is that this is a lightweight version of the app that is just a sanity check. Like, does this actually match the image that you had in your head for how all of this should work? And so from here, I might want to refine this further, right? I might want to either tell it to adjust the design or add some new functionality. So if you're happy with the prototype, then it's time to actually turn this into a proper working application. And to understand what that actually means, I just want to go back to this whiteboard for a second. Remember, we had this front end, which is now being built on our computer. And this is actually considered as something that is running locally. Locally means just running on the computer that you have available, right? This is not on the internet. This is not something that other people can access. This is just something that's on our own computer. But we, of course, want to turn this into a deployed application. We want to deploy it, put it onto the internet so that our team can actually access that. right? That's one thing that we want to do. The other thing that we want to do is actually make this an interactive app in the sense that it has logic and it has a database so that we can actually store things like our customers and projects, and no matter which of our team is logged in, they'll be able to see that data, right? Just the same as all of the web applications that you're familiar with as an end user. So I want to talk about that architecture just for a little bit. Even though Claude Code is going to be building all of this for us, it's really helpful to at least just have a high level understanding about what a web application actually is, because that's going to allow you to prompt more efficiently and ask more specifically for the things that you want. So in order to make our app what we would call a full stack application, an application that has both what we call a front end and an app that has a back end, we need to build that back end, and that consists of both a database, so a place where we can store information, and a server, which is just another computer in the cloud that can run logic on behalf of our application. So you need to think about this application that you build as not just living in one place, it actually lives in multiple places at once. Now, when it comes to building a backend like this, we need to use a cloud provider who can host both this database and this server for us. We really like a provider called Convex. They're really easy to work with and very easy for AI agents to understand. So this is a really good modern provider. There's one other important part of this architecture to call out, and that is a provider for our authentication, which is a fancy way of saying giving the ability for our users to log in and log out. And for this, we're going to use a service called WorkOS. Again, a really modern tool, very generous free plan. And so what's going to happen when we get all of this configured is that our application front end, which is running locally, is going to connect, or it's going to talk to that back end, and it's going to talk to that authentication provider WorkOS. So we've got one integrated system. So if we jump back into Claude Code, what we're going to do is, again, create a new session. We're going to make sure we're in the right folder, that we're using Opus 5. And then we're going to invoke this build skill here. And since this is inside of the folder where our prototype already exists and our spec doc already exists, we shouldn't need to add any other instructions to Claude Code at the moment. It should automatically search for and find the information that it needs. And then based on the instructions that are in the skill file, which are explicitly to use Convex and to use WorkOS, it's going to now set up that backend and that authentication provider, and it's going to hook everything up into that front end that we've created. So you can think of it like we've created sort of the facade of our building, the facade of our application. And now we're building the actual rooms and the infrastructure and the plumbing and the electricity and all of the parts that actually make a building functional. All of that is now being built by this build skill. And again, this is going to take some time to go through. There are going to be moments where you as the human are going to have to jump in here because you're going to need a Convex account and you're going to need a WorkOS account. So the agent should prompt you in this process at the appropriate times for creating and connecting those accounts. Because what this is actually going to allow the agent to do is to make changes in your Convex account, in your WorkOS account on your behalf. Okay, so now is one of those moments where it's asked us to stop. First one is just to run a terminal command. So this is basically just saying, hey, I need you to explicitly give me permission to do this thing on your computer. So we can just hit that little play icon and you'll be able to see it working there in the right-hand side. And what this is doing is actually pulling down some skill files that Convex themselves have written that are going to instruct our agent on how to work with Convex, so that Claude Code actually has all this information in its AI brain, so to speak, of how Convex works. Okay, so that's all done, so we can close that out and we can run this command as well. And if you run into any issues like I just have here, because AI is it's not a deterministic system, right? It can do things slightly differently in different times. You can just tell it, I have an issue, and you can just paste in the description and it will then hopefully go ahead and be able to fix it fairly easily. Okay. So we'll try this again to log in to Convex. And so we're running this in the terminal. So we're going to actually click this little button here to open up the terminal. And if you've never worked in the terminal before, never fear, it's not as scary as it first seems. Just think about this as a way of interacting with your computer in the same way as you do when you click around with your mouse and do stuff, only that you're not clicking around with your mouse. You're sort of bypassing the click, so to speak, and just telling it using words, using text, what you want your computer to do. So in this case, we're actually interacting with Convex through the terminal. So we're setting up our Convex account. It's going to ask you some simple questions here. It's going to ask you to set up a Convex account. When it has a question like this, you've got a Y and an N, so you can type the letter, hit enter, and that'll execute that command. In our case, that is asking us to sign into Convex or to create an account if you don't already have one. I already have an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. Okay, so that's Convex done. It's now asking me to do some details with WorkOS. So at this point, go over to WorkOS and create an account. And when you're on your main dashboard here, it's actually going to give you those environmental variables that Claude Code was asking for. So you can simply copy those and head back to Claude Code and paste them in. However, here's one important caveat is that we shouldn't really be giving our API key here within the chat because this is a sensitive piece of information. Even though right now we're just connecting the test version of our WorkOS account, we don't really want to be putting this in the chat because that will head off to Anthropic, the company behind Claude Code. It'll head off to their servers. So technically now this very sensitive key, right, credential, exists somewhere else on the internet, on Anthropic servers, where it could be compromised. So I'm just going to give the client ID, and I'm just going to remind the agent here that I don't want to give you the API key directly. And what it should do here is it should now instruct us on what to do with this key ourselves, so we don't give it to Claude Code. This is a general principle just to keep an eye out for, is not to put any sensitive information, especially login credentials or API keys, into your conversations with Claude Code. And so here is giving us those alternative instructions for what to do with this key. So this is actually a file that we can click into to open it here on the right hand side. And so I'm going to paste in the key from my WorkOS dashboard, hit save, and then I'm just going to tell the agent that it's done. And by the way, if at any time you actually want to see the files that are being created here, you can hit this little ellipsis menu and click into files. These are all of the files that make up your application at this moment in time. And most of these you're going to want to ignore. This env.local or env.workos.local, this is where we're going to store some of those credentials. So occasionally the agent might tell you to jump into one of these files to add some value. But aside from that, we want to keep things as simple as possible and just have Claude Code do all the work for us. Now, what this build skill is doing is it's taking that spec document that we created in the planning stage and the prototype that we created, and it's inferring what is the database structure, what is all that back-end logic that we need to build in order to support this as a properly, fully fledged application. And it's breaking up that work that it needs to do into multiple phases. So this is the first phase that it's currently doing, and it's going to go through multiple phases and report back when it's done. And again, this is going to take us some time now. So I suggest that you go grab some lunch and come back when this is all done. Okay, so it's been about an hour and build looks like it's done. Now, one of the things, because this is an internal tool, right, an internal CRM, is that we're not going to have a public sign up page. And so part of that build skill is instructing the agent to ask you to provide a user email for that very first user, that super admin that then is going to be able to invite the other users. So I am going to add that email, and then what the AI will do is it will create an account for this user in the background, and it will send me an email where I can sign up. Okay, it's telling me that it sent that email to me. And indeed, I have an email here that is going to take me to a page where I can accept this invitation, add my details, and this is all WorkOS, right? Remember, we have WorkOS as our authentication provider here. So they are providing this screen here and all of the logic behind the scenes to authenticate a user. Now, this is a situation that you might come across as well, as you've got this endless kind of loading indicator when you first log in. So what you can do here is if you go and right click and hit inspect and you go over to your console here, you don't need to be intimidated by any of this. This is just an error message that the application is spitting out. And this is related to some configuration that we need to do in workOS. The console is often a treasure trove of insight. So what we want to do is just give this to Claude, right? So you can just describe the problem very briefly. And if there are some console errors like that, you can paste them in. And it will usually be able to identify what the root cause of this issue is. Okay, so Claude has deployed a fix for this. And so I'm going to try to now sign in. And I now have access to the app. Perfect. And just to test that everything is working, I'll create here a test customer. How you will know that this is actually being created in your real Convex dashboard is by going to Convex itself and logging in. And under your team, if you open up your project here and head under data, you'll actually have a list of all of these tables, right? Think of these like spreadsheets that are all containing different types of data in your application. And so we've got one just for customers. And if I click into here, of course is that test customer that I just created from within my app's interface. Now what we just did, okay, is we just had an app that is running locally on our own machine here, connect to a backend and a authentication service that live in the cloud. This is my rendering here of a cloud. But this app here, right? This app is literally, it's running on this local host 5173, which is this is just basically a little website URL that lives on our computer, right? It's not on the internet anywhere. If you try to share this with your team, they're not going to be able to access it because this, as I said, this is a URL that only lives on your computer. So this application, right, the front end of our application here is still code that lives on our machine only. What we need to do at this point is we need to put it on the internet. We need to put it on the cloud so that our team can actually run our application. Conceptually, this is what needs to happen. We're going to keep our backend living on the cloud. We're going to keep Convex and workOS as they are, except we're just going to do one change within both of them, which is use what we call a production environment rather than a test environment. But the point is that still this database and these servers and workOS's infrastructure, it's still all on the internet, right? But our application front end, which is sort of the orchestrator that talks to these tools and that we actually log in through, right? That's just code living in a folder on our computer. To get it on the internet, we need to do something called hosting. So we need to take this code and we need to give it to some place on the internet where other people can access. Think of that like giving it to a shared Google Drive folder that your team can access, right? That's essentially what we're going to be doing. And there's lots of different companies and providers who host web applications like this. One of the most popular is called Vercel. It's what we use at AirDev, very reliable, very modern hosting provider. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take that folder of code on our computer and we're going to upload it to Vercel. Okay. Vercel is going to interpret those files, that code, as an application and run it as an application and put it out on the internet at a particular URL, right? A particular website address. And that means that our team members on their computers, and their computers, by the way, we call clients, right? So any other computers that run our website are called clients. And very simply, they're just going to visit that website, ourcrm.com, and Vercel then as the server providing that application is going to serve it back, is going to return it back to the client, to our team member's computer, where they're going to run it just like any other application. So this is mostly true, except there's one step here that I am missing. And that is that there's an intermediary service called GitHub. You've probably heard about GitHub. GitHub is just a place where you store code. So at the moment, right, all of this code, all of our applications code just lives on our computer. If our computer crashes or dies, that code is gone. It's not backed up anywhere. So what GitHub does is it gives us a place where we can upload that code to store it, and it's also a place where we can collaborate. So this is Google Drive for code, essentially. And all Vercel is going to do as this hosting provider that's going to turn that code into a working application and run it, Vercel is just going to pull the code from GitHub, and GitHub is going to return it to Vercel. So from our point of view as sort of the developers of this application, all we need to do once we've got GitHub and Vercel connected is we're just going to push our code from our local computer onto GitHub, and Vercel will do the rest. Vercel will also connect that live production version of the application to both our Convex backend and our WorkOS authentication infrastructure. Now, don't worry too much if this all doesn't make sense right away. In the process of building, you can ask questions to Claude. You can get a little bit more of a handle on this. This is just an initial primer just to give you some kind of working model about how this will work. But as with all things, this will become really clear once you actually start putting it into practice. Now, a couple of housekeeping things that you might come across, and if you come across them, you can always, of course, ask Claude to help you fix them, is that if you go and sign out here from our app, we get this kind of weird page here. This is just because when we sign out, which happens from WorkOS, WorkOS doesn't know where to send our user. They need to send us to some web page. And so that setting is actually something that you configure inside your WorkOS dashboard. So you go under Applications, click on your application, and then under redirects, you want to set a sign out URI here. So you can just set that at the moment to just that same localhost page. And the other thing you might notice is when you go to sign in, you also have this option here to sign up, which is not what we want. This is a private internal application. We don't want any user out on the internet to be able to sign up. So this is something, again, we set in our WorkOS dashboard under authentication, and then under features, you can click on the sign up option here and just disable sign up. That's then going to expose only the sign in option for your app. So to get this production version live, again, we're just going to orchestrate everything through Claude Code. So we're going to create a new session here so we don't have all that context weighing down the agent's working memory. And if you don't have a GitHub or a Vercel account, you're more than welcome to create one for each before this step. Otherwise, you can create it during the process here. And so we're just going to ask it to create a private repo on my GitHub account. Repo here is just shorthand for repository. It just means basically a hosted folder containing my code out on the internet. Let's deploy our code there. We'll connect our GitHub to Vercel and deploy a production, meaning a live version. And let's just be explicit that that includes production Convex and production WorkOS. And we'll just let that run. And if it needs any input from us along the way, we'll be here to answer it. Now, along the way, you might see a page like this appear. So this is a page from Vercel asking us, the human, if we're willing to give permission for Claude Code to log into our Vercel account. So this Vercel CLI here, this stands for Command Line Interface. That is just a way for one computer to talk to another computer. So we're essentially being asked to log in here to our Vercel account on behalf of Claude Code so that Claude Code can do stuff in our Vercel account on our behalf. So we want to allow this because this is going to save us from having to click around in the Vercel interface, and instead Claude Code can just orchestrate everything. You may also be asked to give permission for Claude Code to do certain actions. Sometimes sensitive actions here cause Claude Code to stop and say, no, I need a human to approve this action. So this is one of those cases. What we're doing here is we're essentially spinning up or creating our Convex production environment. within our Convex environment, we've got a database that is just for test dummy data, just for us to play around. And then we have a production database that is for our live user data. So anytime that we're going to touch that production database, understandably, we want to be careful. And Claude Code is being extra careful here and saying, hey, are you sure you want to do this thing to the production database? Because when you do stuff to the production database, if things go wrong, that's where you sort of can get into situations where you wipe user data or you make the app unusable for thousands of live users at one time, all that kind of stuff. So this is where we want to be careful. In our case, since we're just creating this for the very first time, very low risk. And we know exactly what that is. If you're ever unsure, you can just ask Claude Code to explain it to you. Just explain, hey, what is the purpose of this command? That is really the beauty about working in this way, is that when there's something that crops up that you don't understand, you can just sort of stop and ask enough questions until you understand the scope of the problem. Of course, you have to be a little bit careful. Claude will often, like all LMs, sort of tell you what you want to hear, as opposed to sometimes always telling the truth. So for important things, it can also just be useful to do a manual Google search, read some documentation, just verify from other sources that what Claude is saying is correct. But for the most part, right, the speed gains that we get from using something like Claude Code mean that as long as we're being careful, we can let it run with most of the work. And it's asking us some questions here. Again, this is exactly one of those areas where you can ask questions. In our case, it looks like Claude already set up a production environment for WorkOS. So just like Convex, WorkOS has a list of basically test users and a list of real live production users. So it's got two environments, one that we can use while we're just in development mode, and one that is the live application that everybody on our team is going to use. So in this case, it can use the existing production environment that it's created. And this deploy key, this is the recommended method. This is the way that you get Vercel to talk to Convex. If you're unsure about this, again, you can ask questions, but this is very well documented within Convex. So I'm very comfortable hitting next on that option. And this is also now asking us, okay, what website URL is your team going to visit to be able to access this application? So if you have a custom domain that you've purchased on GoDaddy or Namecheap or something like that, you can actually connect that in Vercel so that your team can visit, www.yourcompanycrm.com and log in that way. For now, we're just going to use a default placeholder URL that Vercel is going to provide us, just to keep things simple. Okay, it's got to the end of the process. There are a few manual steps that we have to do ourselves here because they touch sensitive API keys that we should not be putting in our chat with Claude, as I referred to at the beginning of the video. So something like this is a terminal command that we want to run ourselves. And this is a really handy one, actually, because what we're going to do is if we go over to this terminal here, and we paste this in, it's already given us the command just that we need to copy paste. And this is going to be a little interactive flow here where it's just going to ask us a series of questions. So do we want to store this as sensitive? Yes is fine. So we can hit that Y, or just as a little quick hint, whatever the capitalized character is here, you just hit enter and that capitalized value is the one that will be used. And now the value. Okay, so the value for this, we actually have to create in our Convex dashboard. So within Convex, this is our development version. Remember when we've got our development data here, and our production environment has a totally different set of data tables. At the moment, we actually haven't deployed anything to production yet. So this is just sort of an empty blank slate. When we're done with this process, it will mirror the structure that we have in our development environment. First of all, though, let's head down to settings and let's create a deploy key. So we can call this Vercel prod or something like that to indicate this is going to be used in Vercel. And we actually only need this one permission here. So this deploy key essentially would allow any other machine, computer, or Claude Code session to do various things in our production Convex account. That's obviously something that's sensitive. Like we don't just want to give those permissions away needlessly. So we just want to only give the minimum permissions here that we actually need for this key, which is this deploy action. So we're going to create this. You're going to see my key here on screen. Don't share this with anybody, right? I'm going to deactivate this key after the video, but we're just going to copy this, and then back inside Claude, we're going to paste that. And that is now added this key into Vercel as something that was called an environmental variable. If you want to know more about it, just ask Claude to explain environmental variables to you. So that's step one. Next one is we're going to run this command here. We're actually going to need to add our own key into here. So I'm actually just, for now, I'm just going to copy this and just paste it down the bottom here because we need to get our WorkOS API key for our production environment. So I'm going to go into WorkOS, and this mirrors the same layout that we had in Convex. Essentially, we've got two environments. So in our production environment, we're not going to have any users yet, in contrast to our staging environment. This is essentially our development environment, where we had that one test user who was created earlier. So in our production environment, we've got nothing. We just have an option here to create an API key. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call this one Convex prod because this key is actually being added into Convex. And I'm going to copy that and replace this value here, right? And now all of this is going to be copied into the terminal. And that has just added this key within my Convex dashboard. Everything I just did, you can also do within Convex. So you can come over here to environmental variables and you can add a new variable. What I just did there was just sort of a quick and easy way, somewhat AI assisted, of getting that value into my Convex environment, my Convex production environment to be specific. This one looks like I can just run this directly, and that's just going to allow Claude Code now to make changes in our production WorkOS environment. And the last one that it needs is this production client ID. So that would be this value here from WorkOS production. So I've just pasted that in the chat. Based on the message, Claude should realize what that is and complete now the remaining steps. Okay, so Claude has finished working, and inside of my Vercel dashboard here, inside of this Meridian CRM project, you can see that there is this domain associated with the app. So this is the public website, the public URL that anybody can go to access our app. So if I click on this, I'll be taken through to the sign-in page. Now what Claude has done is it's created this first user for me. It didn't do it right away. I had to tell it that I wanted it to create it in that WorkOS account. But after that, it did send me this sign-up email. The only problem is that when I went to click on it, it said continue with single sign-on. That's not what we want. We want to be signed in with email. So that's a very easy fix in WorkOS. We have to go down to authentication, methods, and then we have to turn on here email and password. And we can just default here to a strong password policy. And the single sign-on we don't actually need. This is something that you can enable if that's relevant to you. So allow users to sign in with a single sign-in credential that they might have with Google Workspace or Okta, but that is not relevant for our app now. So if I reload that accept invitation page, I can now continue with my email and set a password. Now, one last detail that I want to share with you is how to update this application, right? Because software is not static. You're going to want to change this over time. So I'll give you a really trivial example here of saying, let's just change the button color of these buttons to blue, for example. So I'm going to open up a new session for this. I'm actually just going to use Sonnet just in the interest of speed because it's a very simple change. And I'm just going to say, change the primary button color to sky blue. Now, by default, Claude Code is going to know that it should change this in the development environment. It's not going to be gung-ho and deploy this to our production live environment. It'll do it in our test environment so we can make sure that everything's working before we deploy to production. So going forward, you're going to have this workflow of making changes in your development version. That's your little sandbox where you make changes. And then when you're ready, you're going to ask Claude Code to deploy those changes into the production environment. And that's where the rest of your team, the rest of your user base will see that update now in the app the next time that they use it. Okay, so you can see here it's made the change. It's even opened up a little browser for it to verify this. So that's all looking fine. And if I load my app here on the internet, on the public internet, it still has that older sort of teal green button color. Okay, so now I can simply say deploy to production. So it has detected the fact that Vercel is connected to our GitHub account. So it's just updating now the code for this application on GitHub. And that means that Vercel is automatically going to pull that latest version of the app into its environment and host it out on the internet. So if we actually go into Vercel and go under deployments here, we can see that there is a new deployment that's just happened. It took 17 seconds to change the primary button color to sky blue. And if we now refresh the page in our hosted production environment, you'll see that we have this sky blue button color now. So this is how you update your application over time as your business needs evolve. And one of the things you're probably going to want to bake in sooner rather than later is some kind of AI functionality. If you want to get your head around what kind of AI could work in an application like this, I recommend that you check out this video up over here. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.